Your Excellency, Mrs. Cvijanović, Your Excellencies, dear friends, welcome now to the chapter number 3, which is titled Regional Cooperation and Integration based on the economic geography of the regions. In this chapter, we have the honor to have some 5 very important and distinguished speakers, which is the chairwoman of the Presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina, Mrs. Cvijanović, the ambassador and Secretary General from the Organization of the Black Sea Economic Cooperation, the BSEC, Mr. Lazar Comanescu, the Regional Director of UN Women, Europe and Central Asia, Mrs. Alia El-Yassir, the Secretary General of the Conference of the Peripheral Maritime Regions, Mrs. Elena Marianu, and Mr. Wouters-Vers, who is a research fellow at the Kligenthal Institute of the Netherlands. The session will be moderated by Mrs. Odine Linardatu, a good friend and, of course, head of communications from the Hellenic Foundation for European and Foreign Policy. From now, I would like to invite and to give the floor to Mrs. Cvijanović, and of course to thank her for being for second time with the Balkans and the Black Sea Forum, and looking forward to a very creative discussion with this panel.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, dear participants, dear hosts, it is my pleasure to participate in this important forum to discuss the topics of fundamental significance for the future of our countries and the entire region. Apart from giving us an opportunity to better understand the problems in the region, such forums help us consider the tools that we have at our disposal to ensure better political understanding, viable economic progress, and stronger economic ties in the region. In the past, the Balkan region was associated with instability and political fragmentation. After the war in former Yugoslavia, many theoreticians, journalists, or opinion makers have used the term Balkanization to refer to similar conflicts and processes of disintegration occurring in other parts of the world. The image of the Balkans as an unstable and conflicted region has remained as such, not only because of the tragic events from the past, but also due to the high level of misunderstanding and mistrust that are still evident in certain countries individually and in the region as a whole. Once acquired, this image has not been fully dismantled up to now. Frankly speaking, many evident uncertainties are still there, and if we want to overcome them, more credible, realistic, and sustainable actions need to be taken. We all know that any burdened situation is a threat to a stable economic development based on unhindered flows of foreign investments. Our legislative efforts to create a favorable business environment are visible, and they give positive results. But still, there are serious obstacles that require political efforts and measures in order to reach a truly better environment in terms of both security and economy. That is why it is important that we as political leaders, business people, entrepreneurs, intellectuals, and media workers demonstrate readiness and make all necessary efforts to change the negative image of the Balkans in the global framework. But let's not be naive. Although the greatest share of that responsibility certainly lies with the political leaders of our countries, it is not only them who create and run the political processes in our region. Actually, many of these are created and run externally, where the approach to the countries in the region or political actors in the region is not balanced, very often even lacking basic consistency or credibility. Therefore, how to raise the level of mutual understanding and successfully interact at the economic front for the benefits of all in such complex circumstances, both regionally and globally, remains a big challenge to the Western Balkan countries too. Of course, economic turbulences, pandemic, wars, political tensions, security issues, illegal migrations, and similar threats require stronger cooperation within the region on one side and between the region and the European Union on the other one. To maintain regional stability, is a prerequisite for any future recovery. Unfortunately, we have recently seen many tensions and negative developments in our region, followed by a continually biased and partial approach of our international partners to such incidents or negative phenomena. Among the countries in our region, from the Mediterranean and the Adriatic to the Black Sea, we can see the ones that are already member states of the EU and those that are on the EU path, hoping to reach the EU membership. Those Western Balkan countries that tend to become the EU member states have a great opportunity to prepare themselves for the European integration through various regional cooperation initiatives. The Berlin process that includes all the countries in the region is certainly one of them, as is the Open Balkans initiative currently including Serbia, North Macedonia, and Albania. These two initiatives are compatible in their efforts to enable regional cooperation on the issues of infrastructure and economic development, but also in view of a free and unhindered movement of people and goods, recognition of diplomas and working qualifications, and other things that benefit our citizens. Both initiatives represent an excellent development opportunity for the Western Balkans, at the same time offering a practical exercise for the EU integration. We all know this region is still vulnerable and burdened with events from the past. Each of our countries is still struggling with its own political issues, while at the same time having to deal with numerous economic challenges. Many regional initiatives have been developed in the past 25 years. Some of these have been rather successful, while some have not achieved tangible results. Apart from the internal political burdens in each of our countries, there is still pretty low intensity of bilateral political interaction within the region. At the same time, the level of international interventionism is too high and often biased, which is one of the reasons why the level of our mutual understanding within the region remains to be low. This requires many additional efforts in order to improve the situation in the future. To that end, we support various efforts of the European Union to bring us closer together, but also we expect the EU to have a more pragmatic and credible approach when dealing with our countries individually and when dealing with our region as a whole. That's why I say that this goes the same line when it comes to the treatment of all of us within the region. Nowadays, in the extremely complex situation globally, it is important more than ever to further develop our partnership and the shared vision of the future. Our obligation is to leave better political, security, and economic environments to the next generations. We want them to live in a peaceful and prosperous region that would contribute to global stability, not threaten it. I believe that we have learned the lessons from our difficult past and that we will vigorously work to make a better future by deepening our partnership and strengthening our infrastructural and economic ties. I would like to thank our hosts for the nice events here, where we can really develop our discussion and see what we need to do in the future. I believe strongly that there is a good future for our region, but we have to learn how to use the benefits in order to make it beneficial for all of us. I would like to thank once again our Greek hosts to their hospitality and an excellent organization of this forum. As you said, this is my second time here, and I know how important it is for all of us. At the same time, and at the end of my address, let me emphasize that there are great investment opportunities, both in Republika Srpska and also Bosnia and Herzegovina, with their favorable geostrategic position in the heart of southeastern Europe, in the central part of the Balkan Peninsula, providing an access to the market of 600 million citizens based on several free trade agreements and arrangements. Our country offers low business operation costs and similar taxation policy, and stimulative also, competitive and highly skilled workforce. As Greece is one of our favorite summertime touristic destinations for our citizens, we would like to invite and welcome all Greek friends and also other friends across the region to experience beauties of our country, especially during winter time, including staying on our Olympic mountain of Jahorina, which is our beauty. Thank you very much for your attention.
now it's open. Good afternoon from me too. Thank you, Your Excellency. You raised a lot of issues that we can discuss later. You talked about understanding. Understanding in our region was not always very easy, and lessons learned from the past. That also is not very easy in our region, neither in the Balkans, nor in the Black Sea region, as we have seen, and with the war now in Ukraine. Now, Yannis welcomed our guests, our speakers, our esteemed speakers, so I will give the floor now to Ambassador Lazar Comanescu. You can go to the podium if it's better for you.
For me, it's the same.
Okay.
It's okay, yeah. Madam President, distinguished colleagues of members of the panel I have the honor to be part of, Madam Moderator, distinguished participants. Well, it's nice to be back in Athens. I was here roughly 3 weeks ago, but it's always good to be here and nice. And for that, I would like to thank the Balkan Black Sea Forum. But my thanks and gratitude for being here today go to especially to the president of the forum and to the co-chair of the forum, my all-time friend, Ambassador Christides. Once again, thank you very much, President Balakakis, especially for having given me the opportunity to participate in this year's edition of the forum, which is dedicated to a topic of particular importance and timely chosen. No need, I think, to demonstrate why I say it is both important and timely. Suffice, I think, to simply say that in this period when, due to unfortunate developments in our region, I'm referring, of course, to the war in Ukraine, the issue of security is highly debated. But I would say that it may be highly debated particularly, and it is understandable, in its hard dimension. But one needs to remind that there is a particularly important economic dimension of the security. And when I say economic, it's quite a comprehensive concept. Include, let's say, for example, there was a topic on the panel, on a previous panel, dedicated to energy. Everybody speaks about energy security. A few weeks ago, you had a workshop here dedicated to agro-industries, and that brings me back to the food security. Then we talk about migration. And we have to, while we see now that especially in the media, we see the migration consisting mainly of refugees fleeing the conflicts and so on. But we should never forget that still the bulk, the majority of migrants are migrants motivated by economic reasons. So that's why when talking about migration, it's related to the economic dimension of security. So talking about the regional cooperation and integration based on economic geography, as our hosts suggested to do within this panel, is something which I find as most welcome. It's from this perspective that I would allow myself a few personal considerations, not necessarily as Secretary General of the BISEC, and with reference and focus on the Black Sea area and the Balkan region. Before anything else, I would say that the experience so far clearly indicates that strong economic relations and cooperation and integration, be it via bilateral ties or multilateral, has not only been beneficial in terms of economic development, but it helped promoting stability, mutual understanding, and good neighborly relations. That is security, very substantive security. Mention should be made in this context that cooperation does not exclude competition, but fair competition, which allows for progress, not competition for domination. That's a key element in my opinion. So these were actually the principles laid down as well for the foundation of the organization I have the honor to represent today in front of you, the Black Sea Economic Cooperation Organization, shortly BSEC, which, by the way, marks this year its 30th anniversary, a moment that we would have liked. Actually, you have been actively preparing for that, to appropriately celebrate this 30th anniversary. But for reasons I already referred to, we all know, it was only partially possible. However, looking back to the past 3 decades, one should recognize this organization has contributed to bringing prosperity in the Black Sea region, a region which is quite a complex one, actually a microcosm, with many sensitivities, to say the least, as far as it includes member states which are also members of the European Union, others which are members of the Eurasian Union, others which are making efforts to join one on the other one. And not to speak about sensitivities which we find bilaterally almost in all the cases. But beyond that, beyond that, however, and with all this complexity, we should add also that the BSEC, the Black Sea Area, Black Sea Economic Organization, covers an area of geostrategic importance, global geostrategic importance. And it is not just a bridge, as some would say, but really the bridge between East and West, South and North. And in the previous panel, we got just one example about how important in terms of bridge this region is. The cable and the agreement just signed between Georgia, Azerbaijan, Romania, and Hungary for the transport of electricity. And in the current circumstances, it proves to be the only efficient way to provide energy for those who, because of the conflict, are now lacking it. So this is why I'm saying that the importance of the BSEC region as the bridge, not as a bridge, between Asia and Europe. And yet, well, despite this sometime, as I said already, challenging mixture, the BSEC succeeded to be today the oldest organization in the region, and much more importantly, it has evolved into becoming the most representative and institutionally mature economic organization in this region. In the wider Black Sea area. It is an economic organization, but the definition of economy given by our charter is very wide indeed, covering areas of economic development, customs, trade, customs, services, transport, agriculture, energy, environment, and so on. And there have been concrete achievements in this respect. I will not elaborate that much, just a few examples. And first, and I'm stressing it, for me it is an extremely important aspect. in spite of how, irrespective of such a complexity and sensitivities which I was referring to, the fact itself that this organization succeeded and continued to succeed in bringing together around the same table representatives of all these countries, including in this time, which are the most adversarial ones, especially, well, I'm referring to the conflict in the northern part of it. That's an extremely important value of this organization. It's an extremely important achievement, in my opinion. Second, this organization provides a framework for the elaboration of policies, recommendations, and strategic documents to help member states to devise their the most appropriate economic policy guidelines. I'm referring to the BSEC economic agenda, which has been adopted 10 years ago and which is now in a process of revision. We would have liked to finalize this revision and to come up with a new version of this BSEC economic agenda as a, let's say, as a gift to the 30th anniversary. But for the reasons which I was mentioning, we are not able to finalize this process. Hopefully we'll do that in the first part of the next year. Third, this organization has been making efforts towards facilitation of trade and investment promotion. Fourth, BSEC has been engaged in project management, inter alia through the BSEC Project Development Fund, this organization avails of, and the BSEC Black Sea Project Promotion Facility. Fifth, this organization promoted an intensive cooperation with the European Union. And, yes, very importantly, also promotion of a long, as close ties with observers and sectoral dialogue partners. Now, drawing on BSEC's experience and lessons learned so far, while looking at the same time at what has been achieved by other organizations and actors in our region, I would allow myself to come up with some ideas. First, infrastructure and connectivity, energy, environment, climate change are areas of particular importance for both the Black Sea area and the Balkans. And as a confirmation to what I'm saying, I'm not just referring to the BSEC. I was 1 month ago participating in the Ministerial Council of the Central European Initiative. And there as well, all the ministers were insisting upon this extremely important element, which is infrastructure and connectivity. And not to forget that many of the countries which are in the Balkans and also Black Sea region are also parts of the Central European Initiative. What I depicted myself since taking over the current position is that there is a need of a much better coordination and correlation between different organizations and frameworks of cooperation in our region. And I'm referring here, beside the BSEC, to the CCP, to the Regional Cooperation Council, and I really think that there is room for synergies in this respect. And this is my second remark, my second suggestion, there is need for cooperation, correlation, and synergies with other regional organizations and regional or international organizations. I already referred to the Central European initiatives, but not to forget that there are other initiatives or organizations or frameworks which also cover or impact on the Black Sea region and the Western Balkans. Just a few examples. First of all, the European Union. And by the way, the European Union avails of a Black Sea synergy strategy, as it avails also of a EU strategy for the Danube region. I do see that there is room there for more substance. And here, the countries from this region, from all the two regions, can push for, press positively, I mean, for encouraging the European Union to bring more substance in this respect. And still on this aspect, when I say that there is a need of better correlation and synergies, I didn't mention another quite new framework of cooperation in this, I mean, in Central and Eastern Europe. It's about the 3C initiative, where from countries like Croatia, Slovenia, Bulgaria, Romania are part of this, our region. And I was one of those who assisted at the birth of this organization. And in between, it was happening in 2015 in New York. In between, many ideas, good ideas, has been developed inside this, such as, for example, an infrastructure, communication, road, railways, and highways, North and South Europe, from the Baltic Sea to the Adriatic Sea and Black Sea. And there is also this 3Cs initiative avails of an investment fund for this kind of projects, 3 or 4 or 5 billion euros. On the other hand, we have the European Union with the infrastructure, big infrastructure projects. But I see that there is not the best possible link between these projects, and there is need to, once again, to correlate and to, I would say, mutually reinforcing the capability to implement such projects. That has to do with the complementarity and mutually reinforcing.
Your time is up.
I will finish. I only have one. And to finish, there is need for long-term thinking as well as need for enhancing the project-oriented approach in both regions, the Balkans. And again, I'm coming to the importance of the European Union and the cooperation of the European Union. But here, I allow myself to say that at least partially, at least from time to time, when devising ways and projects of cooperation between the European Union and this part of Europe, it may be good for the European Union as well to listen more to the local actors and avoid, perhaps from time to time, too much of lecturing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you. Now, Ms. Alia El-Yassir, the floor is yours.
So, Excellencies, distinguished delegates and panelists, dear partners and colleagues, those of you here in the room and joining online, it's great to be part of the 2022 Balkans and Black Sea Forum in this beautiful city of Athens. And thank you very much for the hosts for organizing it. I believe the sessions so far have focused a lot on the political and economic aspects of crises. But I was looking at what this forum is supposed to be about. So we are reviewing challenges, we're assessing implications, we're identifying opportunities and potential innovations. And I think we should, at this point, agree that crises actually have a human face. I think definitely when we think in terms of the impact of crisis, we see a human face. And I would also contend that it's true if we think in terms of prevention of crises or disasters from happening in the first place. And I hope that this resonates with you in some way, because I think we all feel, in one way or another, the compounded effects of multiple crises. I think we're still feeling the impacts of COVID-19. I think in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of conversations, and as we've heard from the previous speaker, it's at the top of the agenda in terms of the impacts of climate change, and of course, we're experiencing the impacts of an ongoing war in the region. But when we speak about impact, the bottom line is actually that crises are experienced differently on the basis of existing inequalities, including gender inequality, which is the most pervasive and perhaps what is truly global form of inequality. And I'm not going to throw too much data at you, but I think some of the data is very relevant. If we look at economic inequalities, the picture is very disturbing. By the end of this year, many women will have insufficient income to meet even basic needs for food, clothing, shelter, or energy. We know that across the world, there's approximately 383 million women and girls who will be living by the end of this year in extreme poverty. And women are more likely to be living in poverty than men because they have less access to basic rights, like the right to free movement, ownership of land, or control over resources. And they face systematic discrimination and violence that becomes worse in periods of crisis or instability. So pre-existing gender inequalities and gender-based discrimination constitute drivers of vulnerability. So this is going to be very important to keep in mind as we talk through these 2 days. But it's also a vicious cycle, because actually the crises themselves are going to make those inequalities even deeper. According to a recent study that was undertaken by UN Women together with DESA, it is now estimated that to close all gender gaps across the world, it will take us 300 years. So we're further behind than we were before, and we're nowhere near being on course to achieve the 2030 targets. So we weren't doing very well to begin with, but I think this is a moment for us to recognize we're doing even worse because of the multiple and intersecting crises. So not only that, we really need to look at this from even the efficiency perspective, because women's unequal economic participation is going to hold us back in terms of resilience to any further economic shocks and having any chance at economic recovery. If we look at the region more broadly, the Europe and Central Asia region, only 45% of working age women are actually actively engaged in the labor market. And we know that of those 45%, actually millions have left the labor force for good because of the COVID-19 pandemic. We also know many women are concentrated in the informal labor force. So even aside from agriculture, about a third of women are self-employed in informal work. And this tends to be home-based, small scale, it's unprotected and uncounted. And on top of that, and I think a lot of you have heard this in the last couple of years, unpaid care and domestic work is on the rise for women and girls. We know that in this region, women do 3 times as much unpaid care and domestic work than men do. So the question is, what do we do about it? And I will tell you that for the long haul, for making sure that we have solid foundations, so to make sure that we're going in the same direction and don't regress, we really have to tackle those structural barriers to achieving gender equality. And this is why, as UN Women, we put a lot of emphasis on gender-responsive governance. And we have many years, decades-long work with governments in the region, particularly strong in the Western Balkans, that looks at gender-responsive planning, policy-making, monitoring, and very importantly, budgeting. That focuses on making sure that we're not just putting words on paper and making commitments, but we're actually investing in the right areas, and that we're also doing the monitoring and reporting to make sure there's accountability. So national budgets are key to making the change that we want to see happen actually happen. But we also have to look at financing. And we heard about the EU and the EU integration process from the previous speaker. As UN Women, we developed an initiative, a program that is called the Gender Equality Facility, which is actually looking at the investments that the EU is making through the instrument of pre-accession in candidate and potential candidate countries to make sure that those investments are also aligned with the EU acquis. One of the impacts that we've seen from the Ukraine crisis, for example, is the 2023 EPA funds, the Instrument for Pre-Accession Funds, have been redirected for energy subsidies. And this has now stalled a lot of the really important work that we've been doing in other areas for the longer term development. But I would say that energy poverty is also a gendered issue, so there's also a potential. And I really call on governments to really look at the ways in which they are looking at their budgets, but also the financing that is coming in, including on integration. I won't go into a lot of detail, but when we look at structural barriers, it is really important to also look at harmful social norms that keep setting us back, and civil society organizations being such a critical partner to address this issue. And I do want to say that gender equality is a political issue. Again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but I think many of you will understand what I say when I say that there's a pushback on women's rights. And this isn't happening in just any single country. It's happening along many countries, and it's very much linked with nationalist discourse. And that's where regional cooperation is really needed to tackle this pushback and keep us going in the right direction. So I'm going to keep repeating it. We need to tackle these structural barriers. We have to make whatever we're not seeing, whatever is invisible, visible so we can tackle it. And we have to look at investments in a different way, not only to reap economic or political benefits, but also long-term social benefits. And so we have to approach challenges in a different way. But there are, for the purposes of our discussion today, also other areas that can accelerate transformation. It's not at the expense of the structural, but in addition to it. And if we look at the areas of transformation, I think it's been covered also adequately by previous speakers, but we do look at science and technology are the fastest growing industries worldwide. And we know that 90% of jobs worldwide have some digital component or require digital skills. And there's a high demand for professionals in the STEM fields and for ICT skills. But there's a shortage of workers. So we need to look at things in a different way. And what does this have to do with gender equality? Well, we know that there are gender gaps in this field. And the European Institute for Gender Equality has put out data and evidence to show that actually narrowing the gender gap in STEM education in the EU alone could generate up to 1.2 million more jobs and can increase long-term GDP by up to 820 billion euros by 2050. So that's a good case for making this investment. So we have to really now think and make a compact through this forum that as we are navigating these global crises and the crises in our region, we have to make sure that they are not making existing inequalities worse and that we don't stop the good work that has been started to tackle those inequalities. So we have to reshape the status quo because whatever we've been doing got us to where we are today. Is not going to get us to where we want to go. So we really have to rethink. And economic resilience, recovery and growth are contingent on smart economics that recognize and value women's contributions. I invite all of the participants to engage in the upcoming Commission on the Status of Women, which is looking at innovation and technological change and education in the digital age for achieving gender equality and empowerment for all women and girls. These intergovernmental fora, especially at the global level, should be connected to this kind of regional dialogue so we keep moving in the right direction. And I want to also speak about, this is a higher level kind of message, but it is possible to also leverage, for example, information and communication technology in the response to crises. And I wanted to talk about an event that's actually happening simultaneously with this one in Ukraine that is looking at women leaders in the digital space. And we are implementing this together with partners, including the Ministry of Digital Transformation of Ukraine and Google Ukraine. And it's part, they were doing this online marathon, and it's part of a program that is actually increasing access of women and girls to the digital space. But through this initiative, when the war hit, we developed a digital platform that is called DIA, and it's under the slogan of "I know I will survive," has been able to help over 300,000 women access information. So the digital space was leveraged to support women under dire conditions so that they can access services, they know where they can get them, and they can report their status if they have had destruction or loss of property, if they've become displaced, or they have experienced some form of violence. This speaks to the spirit of partnership, but it also really speaks to the commitment by the government of Ukraine and its private sector partners to continue on the road of gender equality and looking for ways in which to keep pushing forward, even under the hardest of circumstances. And so I really commend them on that, and I think we all should commend them on that. Another key accelerator, and I can see from the time I'm not going to be able to talk about it a lot, but really what I want to focus on, there are areas where we're not looking for additional investments, but we're looking at the investments that we're making in a different way. One area of this work is what we are calling gender-responsive procurement. Actually, if we look, and it's focused very much on women entrepreneurs. Around the world, we have almost 225 million women entrepreneurs, and they own around 35% of all the firms in the formal economy. But when we look at the global spend on procurement, they get only 1% of what private or public sector are spending in their procurement practices. There's something very off here. And this is what we're trying to correct as UN Women by convening partners around the table to do this, because this is a lost opportunity. I would be happy to answer more on this. We covered it in the Agribusiness Forum last year. We are calling it gender-responsive procurement. We're starting in-house. We're leveraging our mandate. We have a triple mandate on the normative. We do coordination work within the UN system, and we have our programmatic work. We're practicing what we preach. We ourselves are implementing gender-responsive procurement. We're leading the UN system to do more. We're building the business case, particularly with private sector, to do this. We're going with a certification program so that we know which businesses are actually women-owned, which ones are women-run, or which ones have gender equality or gender-responsive practices. And we're doing training programs from the buyer side, the seller side, and very importantly also on the investor side, because we need those businesses to grow. And we place very much women entrepreneurs at the center of what we do. They are experts on what they need. They are doing the work. We're just not investing in them. We're not buying from them. So there's something that everybody in this forum can do in this area of work. And it really is about partnership. I invite you to find out more, and I'll be happy to answer any questions, whether they come up during the panel or on the sidelines. But many thanks again, and I hope that I've planted some seeds that will get you to think about what could be done differently through this forum and through your practices, wherever you're coming from. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ms. Mariano?
Thank you very much for inviting the Conference of Peripheral Maritime Regions in this forum. I think I'm going to be speaking on what the Secretary General of BSEC has told us a while ago, that it will be good to listen to the local actors. Don't know which local actors you were talking about, but I'm going to speak about my own, the local and regional authorities that we represent in the Conference of Peripheral Maritime Regions. And I'm going to speak also about the regional cooperation, so the subject area of our roundtable here, regional cooperation integration based on the economic geography of the regions. We are born 50 years ago, old and mature at the same time. So the conference was born by the willingness of their members. So the regions of 14 countries, maritime regions, decided that they needed to put themselves together and create a space where their aspirations, needs, wishes, proposals would be actually being heard by the European institutions and beyond. Because our conference is not only as part of the EU, is part of the larger area of the Council of Europe. We are shaped in a very peculiar way. It's quite unique in all the kind of associations of local and regional authorities in Europe. We are shaped in what we call geographical areas, geographical commissions. So we work on sea basins, and we have 6 of those. We have the North Sea, the Atlantic Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, the Balkans and the Black Sea, the islands, the Baltics, and we have created subgroups, more specific task forces on the Adriatic and Ionian to follow the work of the European institutions and the work, of course, the stakeholders are doing, member states, regions, organizations, NGOs on that part of the world, and a task force on Arctic. So in all those geographical areas, we work with partners, we work with neighbors of Europe. So, because in all of these, North Sea, you have the Norway, that's part of us, obviously, Scotland, in the Atlantic, we have the UK, now that's, of course, a neighbor, in the Mediterranean, and in the Balkans and Black Sea as well. So, for us, this family is a good family, and it's a large family of people working together. So the way we try to pass the messages across on all the policy areas we're working on is to see specifically how they address and they impact our partners in the sea basins. Because anything we talk about, territorial cohesion, maritime policy, name it, it's assessed differently from where you're based, and the territory you are based. So we are working very much on all the policy areas affecting regions, from the territorial cohesion to the maritime development, to the maritime spatial planning, to the transport connectivity, to everything, social agenda, migration, you mentioned before, climate change for us, maritime regions, climate change is in our backyard. It's not something that's going to happen, it's something that's already happening. So how we address climate change with the raising of waters, with the extreme weather conditions, is something that we very much address. Not only in terms of mitigation, what to do when it comes, but also in terms of adaptation, how to prepare ourselves on that. And that is being addressed in all of our sea basin areas in a different way, but in a very complementary way as well. So we have this very beautiful working activity, which brings the local to the central, which is the General Secretariat implemented in Brussels, in Rennes, in France, and in Barcelona. We are going to become multinational in a moment, just based in different places. And that's where we actually make our European proposals to the institutions. Because our strength is the way to work locally, to make proposals that they make sense to these people, to these regions, to these sea basins, to these neighbors, and bring those to the European institutions through the legislative proposals, the funding proposals, and even before these become in the European Parliament or in the European Council a legislative discussion, before when the European Commission is actually going to make the proposal. So we are very much ahead in whatever we try to propose, because we really know the needs, we really know the problems, the issues, and we really try to make those heard, local people, actors, to be heard at the European institutions. And that's something that most of the times we have successfully done, because when the legislation is coming, for instance, on issues on transport accessibility, or how do you actually change your trans-European transport networks now to facilitate access via Moldova and Ukraine, because when the war started, we all of a sudden realized we needed so much to have better connectivity with Ukraine, which we don't have. So this is a very simple kind of thing, but it's a very important kind of thing as well, because if we want any kind of food to come back to us, obviously it's going to be through the ports or through the railways, through things that we need to actually elaborate into a program, into the trans-European transport network the European Commission is proposing. And that's something that we have influenced for that. So proposals that we have made, how the corridors will connect to facilitate this accessibility, is something that we have worked for with, because we used to have, of course, members of Ukraine in our Balkan and Black Sea organization, commission, which unfortunately now are not there, but we are still re-establishing a way to work with them. Now, in terms of, that's the way we structure ourselves, the way we work, In terms of policy areas, I mentioned already the area of the maritime or the transport, trans-European network activities that we are doing. We're working a lot on migration because, of course, for us, we are like the borders of Europe. If you see where we are located, the peripheral maritime regions, we are at the borders of Europe. So since 2015, we have had all these coming in from refugees in Syria when the war started, because we have this little crisis a little bit all over the place. So we are very used as regions to actually receive, so to be there to receive and integrate the refugees. So we have a vast experience on the subject. At the time when in 2015 we had major problems of actually receiving people and making sure that these people are treated properly and they're giving dignity that is being needed and security and everything, we had the possibility to receive 5,000 in 2 of our Spanish regions. And you know why we couldn't do that? Because regions that don't have competence on that subject. We had to have agreement from the member state of Spain to be able to receive these people, although the regions themselves, they had a bilateral agreement to make this happen. We wanted no money, no nothing. We had the ships ready, we had everything ready for this to happen. So sometimes we need to listen even more the local or regional actors, because they are more open to these kinds of things. I don't know how you feel in your own, but I really feel the regions I'm working with are very open to this kind of receiving and making sure that in terms of humanitarian assistance or in terms of integration of people, in terms of using for workforce. I mean, in some of my areas, they don't, in the north of Sweden, for instance, they don't have so many people, so they would be happy to actually receive. So it's a way it's a win-win situation, so they see it very practically. That's another subject area where practically we're doing so much work. Now, the other issue we are working on is maritime. Obviously, we're the maritime regions of Europe. We have set up over the last mandates of the European Parliament, the last 3 mandates, so 3 times 5 years, an intergroup. So our idea was that the maritime issues, they were not addressed in a transversal way. They were having fisheries activities, they were having a commission of fisheries in the European Parliament on transport, on whatever you want, but nothing on maritime as such. And for us, being the maritime regions, everything that addresses the sea is totally transversal. You know, it can be about the fish, it can be about the food, it can be about the use of the space, it can be about the interrelation between what happens on the earth and what happens on the sea. So it's so much that happens that is really interlinked. So it's not for us to create, it's for us to actually being able to make it established, to help the establishment. So we convinced over 150 signatories of the European Parliament that they were happy to do that. And we have now for 3 consecutive mandates, and we hope to have it in the 2024 mandate when the European Parliament, of course, as you know, will be renewed, to have this intergroup which addresses maritime sector areas in all aspects of its, of all sectors and all actors and all partners. And we have also private sector coming in, NGOs coming in, all of the MEPs, of course, the commissioners are calling us to actually say maybe we can use it to work together on one particular proposal we want to make. So it's a very good way to cooperate informally on something that can be very formally approved afterwards in terms of legislation in the European Parliament as a follow-up or as an initiative or as a proposal that could come from this particular informal gathering. I believe a lot in these informal gatherings. That's why I agree 100%. And I mean, we are sectoral partners to you for some time. We have a memorandum of understanding together. I really think we should do a lot of things, because a lot of things has been said, and we can maybe structure ourselves a bit better to see how we can help each other in developing, in particular in these times, which are not pleasant times. And we don't know how these times will end. So it's something that we definitely need to be working together on all sectors. We are regions, but we also have very good relations with member states or with the European institutions, for sure. So it's something that we can definitely, and we do have a work on equality that the Basque countries is running. So what you said is something that we are dealing with on a very, very regular basis, and by all means, if we can have some sort of cooperation in the task force when they're working, is probably something that could be helpful for all of us. So I don't want to take too much of your time. A last word word about what we do on Ukraine, because as I said before, Ukraine has regions that they were members of ours, and we of course don't see them any longer. We have contacts with the different ambassadors in member states, and we create some contacts with those that are starting to be liberated now. And we are participating in one of the, it's called the Ukraine Alliance. It is all the associations of local authorities and regional authorities, together with the European Committee of the Regions and also the Congress of the Council of Europe. We work together to organize ourselves, because my regions, they do it anyway. So they help in the humanitarian. They do bilateral work with the regions in Ukraine. So what we try to do within this format is to actually coordinate the efforts for the reconstruction. We're not going to build a hospital, but maybe we can help on the training, or we can help about, you know, the things that we can do on local democracy. There are things that we can actually help with. And we try to see the needs specifically with the Ukraine regions, and obviously we will establish a coordination mechanism to whatever we are already doing, so that we don't repeat ourselves. We are very much focusing on helping during the wintertime, because we're speaking about the 19 degrees in our houses, but there they don't have houses and they don't have nothing. So it's really important that we are actually helping, and we will do that, and we are doing this in a structured way via this organization. Again, an informal organization, but definitely something that we all need to make sure that humanitarian aid and energy facility would be there to help these people in need. Crises are surrounding our area from the very beginning. We still need to work together now more than ever. So this is our opportunity in this forum and beyond to make sure that we have these bilateral discussions and find some specific ways to actually do things happening on the ground. Not thousands of those. We can do 3, 4, but then we will do it properly. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Mrs. Perez.
So, ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, thank you very much also to the previous speakers for their excellent introductions. I know I'm here at a forum which is mostly focused on economics and business, but I would nevertheless like to devote my 10-15 minutes to politics, and the politics of EU enlargement, to be precise. And first of all, I'd like to congratulate Ms. President with the fact that today the General Affairs Council of the European Union approved candidate status for Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is good news, and I think we need some good news in EU enlargement. Yeah, let's see. The reason that I want to talk about EU enlargement and this politics for EU enlargement is, I think, the political future of the European continent. The level of political integration on our continent, of course, has a huge impact also on business and economic cooperation. I mean, the fact, for example, that Romania and Bulgaria have not yet gotten the approval to become a part of the Schengen area, of course, it impacts the trade between those countries and the rest of the European Union. Now, the history of EU enlargement, as we sometimes tend to forget, has been a very successful one. From an economic community of 6 countries focused on coal and steel cooperation, this developed into the European communities, and that grew in the early 2000s to eventually a European Union of 28 and now 27 member states. And I think this widening and this deepening of the European Union, it really has led to a stable, secure, and economically prosperous continent. The latest Big Bang enlargement round of the EU in 2004 and 2007, and of course afterwards also the joining of Croatia, it has not been without its problems. I mean, with currently 27 member states, the EU's decision-making capabilities, as well as its ability to live up to its own democratic standards, have been increasingly under pressure. And we also see that the current EU enlargement round, that is the one, well, with the Western Balkans and nowadays also Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia has a perspective. But this current round with the Balkans started in 2003, and as such, it's taking a very long time. I think what we see is that the reforms that the EU would like to see happening in terms of democracy, in terms of good governance, those are coming about only slowly, and we've also seen on the part of the EU, on the side of the EU, sometimes delays over issues that have had nothing much to do with the actual accession process. And then, of course, this year, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has fully and severely undermined the geopolitical stability and security of our European continent. Now, all of this poses questions for EU enlargement and the future of European integration. Should the EU further enlarge quickly with the countries of the Western Balkans, with Moldova, Ukraine, or Georgia, or potentially even others, because of these geopolitical issues? And if geopolitics plays a role in the decision-making, how to go about the requirements of good governance and democracy. And lastly, functioning of the EU with 27 member states is already under pressure. Shouldn't there be internal reforms first before we continue with enlargement? Well, these are some of the questions that I would like to discuss in my presentation, but before coming to those, let's zoom in a little bit on the current EU enlargement process, and especially with the Western Balkans, and why things are going so slow. Because in practice, EU enlargement is, of course, a very straightforward, or in theory, I must say, EU enlargement is, of course, a very straightforward process. I mean, any country in Europe can apply to become a member of the European Union. EU decides whether a country meets basic democratic and economic criteria to start the process. And in theory, after a country gains candidate status, the negotiations start, legislative alignment takes place, and when that process is finished, and of course, legislative alignment is a very immense process. It entails everything from EU fisheries policies to justice and home affairs matters, from public procurement law to the common foreign and security policy. But after that alignment, a candidate can become a member of the EU. That's the theory, at least. And this process is based on a principle that we call the conditionality principle, right? The idea that candidates advance on their EU path only after making adequate reforms. And then there's the central incentive, which is, of course, the EU membership and all the benefits that come with that, amongst which a seat at the political seat at the table, right, of the EU, but also access to EU structural funds, etc. Now, in practice, I'm afraid that the process is not as straightforward as it is in theory. There are countries in the process that are formally frontrunners. Take Serbia or Montenegro, for example. They're frontrunners formally in EU accession, and their European integration path is progressing. But at the same time, there are independent reports, such as, for example, Freedom House, that show that in terms of democratic development, sometimes things are not going forward, standing still, or even backsliding. Now, I think that most analysts working on EU enlargement actually agree that these countries are nowhere near completion of the process, and that they're, it will take some more years before these countries can join, even if the process is already taking such a long time. I mean, Montenegro has been negotiating since 2012, Serbia since 2014, so it's already a very long process. So then the question is, why is this conditionality principle not working? Well, I think one of the problems is that this actual accession perspective, the main incentive for countries to reform, is weak. And that's, for example, because the EU has failed or delayed to reward countries that have taken the necessary steps. So we've seen, I know I'm in Greece here, but I must say I'm Dutch, so I can be frank, right? We've seen that, for example, North Macedonia, it has been blocked for a long time in its European integration path on issues that have not much to do with the actual accession criteria. And even after signing the Prespa agreement with Greece, there were still more delays, and only this summer the country was able to actually start its negotiations. And in this whole accession process, of course, EU member states have a veto, so they can basically block every step of the way. And this constitutes a problem. And I think what we also see is that this credibility of the European Union to sort of set demands has also gone down in the past years because of the rule of law issues that we see within the European Union. So in short, one of the problems is that the EU is not fully living up to its own side of the deal and its own standards, so to say. Well, second, then on the side of the candidates, reforms on especially core issues like democracy, independence of the judiciary, banning high-level corruption, etc. These things are taking longer than expected. And I don't think we should question whether these countries at large want to join the European Union, but sometimes steps that governments take are not always in that interest. And you see that sometimes laws on paper are aligned with the European Union, but the actual societal and political transformation does not take place or only very slowly. And the problem with the EU has been that it has sometimes also been a bit, well, scared maybe or hesitant, let's put it that way, to call out on a lack of reforms or on democratic behavior. In the Netherlands, we say, there's a saying that you can play good weather. You can show things and put them in a very positive light, even if in practice things may not be as positive as that. So, I mean, for example, we saw that Commission President von der Leyen visited Serbia I think it was earlier this year, and she said Serbia is well advanced on its European integration path. Formally, maybe that's true, but as I also noted, there are still some problems that the country will need to overcome to join the EU. And I think also in the technical reports from the European Commission, we see that there's detailed monitoring on all requirements, but sometimes they fail to really call a spade on whether things are moving in the right direction for the accession process at large, right? So to come to an overall conclusion of whether things are heading in the right direction. Now, there are some other things. Of course, the bilateral issues and conflicts that we see in the Balkans region have not been fully resolved. We've seen in the past week how explosive relations between Serbia and Kosovo still are. As long as there's no final agreement, this risk of escalation remains, unfortunately. And of course, Russia is a country that's very keen to capitalize on such tensions and to try to actually spur them up to maintain some influence in the region and also to withhold the region from its EU integration path. Now, that leaves us with a lot of frustrations on both sides. There's this idea or the saying that the Balkan countries are in this ever-during waiting room. And then I haven't even talked about Turkey, which is a country where I think the accession process is, well, at this point, accession perspective is not very feasible at all. Maybe I should try to take a somewhat more optimistic view because there are many things happening and in a way, also with Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia, the EU, of course, has a chance to do better. And the roadmap for that is already there because the EU itself also recognized in 2020 in its revised accession methodology that not everything is going well, and it recognized some of these problems that I just sketched. So the current EU strategy has this ambition for more practical engagement, for clearer political communication, for reversibility, and all these kind of things to ensure a merit-based and straightforward approach. Now, if the EU wants to capitalize on that and do these, take the right steps, I think it will need to make sure that this accession process is indeed straightforward again, and that it is able to decide on new steps in the process if countries have made the necessary reforms, that bilateral issues do not stand in the way. I think the geopolitical situation in Europe does call for speeding up the process, being serious about the consolidation of the European continent, and I think this is also something that the EU and the Western Balkans leaders last week in Tirana at their summit recognized. But to finish, I think the current approach will not be enough. I mean, even during this accession process, we will need to make sure that cooperation and engagement between the candidate countries and those who are not yet a candidate on the one hand and the EU improves. And that, of course, Europe at large is facing many crises, right? It's on energy security, on migration management, on security, on climate, on housing and jobs. And these are common crises that require common solutions. So it means that the Balkans and the Eastern neighbors will need to be integrated in decision-making procedures before already becoming a formal member of the EU. And I think there are many promising ideas in the expert community on so-called phased integration that the EU can take further. And I'm also glad to see that in last week's Tirana summit, indeed, it recognized the need for engagement beyond the mere enlargement process. And I think, therefore, this forum is also so important, where we are here today, Balkans and Black Sea Forum, because it really focuses on sectoral cooperation, right? It focuses on topics of climate change, on digital, on many topics that we've connectivity, and these are the things where we can move forward.
Well, your time
I'm
is...
finishing.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
So just to conclude, the EU enlargement, I think the process is in somewhat rough waters to remain in the maritime spheres. Europe at large faces many crises. The only answer will be to enhance cooperation and to be open and honest towards each other. And I think we need to creatively think about new models for the widening and deepening of the European Union and take those further. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sorry for the...
And now we will begin our discussion, and I want to start with a question to you, Madam President. You got the good news now. You are starting the negotiations with... please. With the... no, okay. Bosnia and Herzegovina has its problems. You have problems with the communities. You haven't solved that. And Dayton Agreement, of course, didn't help, and I'm very polite in telling that.
The Dayton Agreement didn't
help you.
It helped us very much, because Dayton Agreement established a country, and we have lived in peace for 27 years so far.
Yes, but it gave you...
it helped us a lot.
Yes, but it gave you something like a constitution that maybe wasn't so helpful after you got over.
I would advocate completely different, standpoint. My standpoint is actually that thanks to this Dayton Agreement, which gave us constitution, and then our constitution is Annex 4 of Dayton Agreement, we have managed to live in peace as good countrymen in one country, and through Dayton Agreement we got not only peace, but we got our constitutional system, which is very important for us. So Bosnia is established, or was established by Dayton Agreement as a highly decentralized country, having two autonomous entities and also a central level of authority. So, for the beginning of that process, I think it was quite okay. But the problems appeared when this Dayton Agreement was in a way thwarted, or was in a way kind of, pushed away from its original sphere and original root. And it happened through interventionism. And through that interventionism of the international community, we got actually a country which lives in two realities. One reality is constitutional reality, another one is institutional reality, which means that we have institutions that are not recognized by our constitution. And all the internal discussions in Bosnia are actually about whether it needs to be centralized or it needs to remain decentralized. So this is the basic discussion, or political discussion, still political discussion. But I think that the most important thing is actually that we live in peace, and it's manageable. Actually, the situation is really manageable there. So it depends also on how all that arrangement of Dayton Agreement is treated from outside. Instead of wasting energy on something which cannot be changed like this, it's better to see how we can put everything in function and how we can coordinate and have good coordination of our different levels of authority, and I think that it is possible. I was Prime Minister for 6 years of Republika Srpska, one of the two constituent entities, and at that time, that was a golden era of good communication and cooperation of different levels of authority. So I know that it can work if people want it to work.
Now, do you believe that the EU can help you more? That it
help
will be
us more, help us.
It will be a driving force for you.
But you can help us more, but I will just pick up from something what I heard here. We need to discuss the thing like this, whether the accession process is really something which is going to happen. Can we have an idea whether it happened in a proper way or we needed to change some things, So my idea would be actually that the EU needs to reform itself, but at the same time, simultaneously, it has to do everything in its power to enable this accession process, which means that there are two simultaneous roads, and both these roads need to have a good, I would say, course, dynamics, and mutual understanding why it's necessary to have both of these activities, happening at the same time. Like to pay attention about how to reform itself without knowing how important it is to include Western Balkan countries in that, is kind of a waste of time. Or to think how to include Western Balkan countries, not thinking about how to expand its institutional capacity, how to expand its possibility, its goodwill, or things like that, So it doesn't work either. So I'm very happy because of this green light when it comes to candidate status, for Bosnia and Herzegovina. At the same time, I'm not naive, so I know it takes a lot of efforts from both sides, from the EU, but also not only Bosnia and Herzegovina, all the countries in our region. What makes me nervous as a politician who is responsible towards its own people, because it is us who are supposed to create processes, and it is us who go, and run for different positions in elections, and it is us who are responsible to our audience and to our voters, to our citizens. Is actually, and this is something which I mentioned here in my address in the beginning, is actually that a lot of processes are run externally, and then there is responsibility of local leaders for all of these things. So that this is something I disagree with very much, and I agree with the concept where there is good communication, there is harmonization of activities, there is clear idea of all the objectives ahead of us. To speak vaguely about European perspective 20 years after Thessaloniki summit this is something which cannot work. So now, if we know what standards needs to be applied, and if there is this genuine approach to all of these countries in the region, then okay. But what we have seen recently, and not only recently, in the past 20 years, is actually this completely different, not balanced, unbalanced approach to different political actors. So I will give you one very simple example. So first, I will always say that the Dayton Agreement can work, but of course there should be some modifications in order to make all these levels of authority be compatible, work together, and uniform some of these activities. So that's okay. This is something I agree with. But for instance, if you have some statement which comes from Republika Srpska, this is very simple example of this unbalanced approach, of this biased approach, and then everything. Republika Srpska, which is part of Bosnia. And I will mention Serbia also, because it's also very important and it can serve the purpose here.
Yes, because it's connected. What you are telling me, you are trying to tell me that they are
I'm telling you that what the EU, when we have some situations in Bosnia, in Serbia, any other country in the region, then the EU and some other partners, have different approach to different political actors, favoring someone and, trying to, portray in black colors someone else. So when there is a statement from Republika Srpska, then everybody would say, wow, these guys are troublemakers. They are trying to undermine Dayton Agreement, which is not true, because we advocate very much constitutional setup established by Dayton Agreement. They want to have independence, you know, which is not true, because we just want to defend our autonomy given to us by constitution. Maybe that constitution is not okay for someone. As long as it is in place, it needs to be respected, because then you are a normal country if you respect your own constitution. At the same time, if there is a statement which is not okay, and coming from Sarajevo, the response which we would receive from the European Union would be, both of you would be nice, not both of us, one of us. So if it is Republika Srpska, it's you guys from Republika Srpska, it is someone from Sarajevo, oh, both of you should be nice, polite, and things like that. It goes same line when it comes to Serbia and Kosovo. If there is some statement issued by Serbia, representatives, officials, etc., everybody will attack it because it is inappropriate, it is not okay, it is not decent, it's things like that. If you have some statement, and there have been very rude statements recently from Kosovo officials, then everybody will say, both of you guys would be very nice, would be very calm. So what I'm trying to say is, okay, maybe it looks difficult to understand Bosnia viewing it from outside. But what I advocate is actually, as long as we have this constitution, which keeps us together in peace, to live there in peace, and which enables us to operate in coordinated way, I'm okay with that. I need to respect that, If there is some need to, I wouldn't say centralize some of the activities, but unite some of these activities, I'm okay with that, as long as these things can serve the purpose. But, to do something having completely vague European perspective, which is only perspective, then, why would we do anything like that? So, I'm trying to say that both European Union and us individually, countries in the region, need to show respect for each other first, need to show kind of dignity in our communication and in our operations, business operations, political operations, whatever, and both of us need to have this kind of, balanced approach to all these things happening in the region. This region is burdened with the problems. It's not enough just to turn a blind eye to say everything is going to kind of, disappear just because we guys decided that these things will disappear. So let's not be naive. Let's advocate and let's stand for initiatives like this so that we can see what we can do regionally, what we can do individually in our countries, and what we can do as part of the EU, and I hope that we will become part of the EU.
Thank you very much.
You might not be happy with my answer, but I'm politician.
Thank you very much. And I am a journalist. Well, as long as you answer the questions of the journalists, it's very, very nice for us. As you don't if you don't avoid us.
What you guys expect to do.
No, but to answer and not avoid us. That's the issue here. Okay, Ambassador, my next question is for you. You talked about cooperation, about Black Sea. Well, now Russia has militarized Black Sea. Do you think that's becoming a huge problem in the near future? We don't see the war ending. Russia is occupying Ukraine. So do you find that that is kind of a huge problem in the area? That you, even with cooperation with the other actors, maybe you cannot overcome?
Well, of course, we are living in a real world and we are not naive. Turks, yeah? Okay. Now it's okay? Okay. As I was about to say, we are not naive. We have to be aware that we are living in a real world with its pluses and minuses. But let me stress once again what I have already said in my introductory statement. I think that even if in the most adversarial situations, I stress, even if in the most adversarial situations, I think that there is room, and there should be room for some open door for dialogue, because at the end of the day, there will be an end. And that end would be only possible with dialogue. This is number one. Number two, the benefit or the key, to use the EU language, of this organization, which is the BISEC, is, as I said, the fact that in spite of this difficult situation, we are getting around the same table representatives from all these countries, from Russia and from Ukraine, is already by itself an assessment, an achievement, and this is happening. I may mention that, understandably, up to the 24th of February, practically our activities, or working groups, meetings, and so on, had to be put on hold, postponed. But in between, everybody realized that resuming those activities is beneficial to all the countries in the region. And so we succeeded in resuming practically our activity starting from end of June this year. And again, keeping the possibilities, the opportunity for dialogue, for communication. Just for, even if in antagonistic terms, if you keep the possibility to speak to each other, to listen to each other in a way or another, to listen even to things which are not pleasant, this is a good situation. And this is what's happening now. So that's why I would say that, of course, we are not naive. We know that things are extremely complicated, difficult, but closing the door and leaving only the way for bloodshed is not the best guarantee for the future.
Thank you very much. And now I'm coming to you, Ms. Yassir, about women and about children. The Ukrainian war, the Russian war against Ukraine, that's to be correct, has created a huge problem for Ukrainian women and children. We saw that they became refugees much more than men. Of course, men are fighting there. And so by millions, I think, they went without their house, they left their jobs. Do you plan to do something about that? Does that create a new situation for you? Or you have seen that happening in other countries that are far away from us, and we see that more clearly now because it's happening in our neighbor, in Europe?
Okay. Big question. I know we're running out of time, so I'm not going to be able to answer fully, but I would say, yes, it is a huge displacement. It's actually millions. I think the estimate is 14 million at the present time of people have been displaced in Ukraine, and the majority are women and children, whether in Ukraine or outside of Ukraine. I think if you're working in Ukraine, and it's not just us, I mean, we're relatively a small partner in a very large ecosystem that is there to enable and support. From our perspective, it's just putting the issues on the table. If you're working in Ukraine to support Ukraine, you need to be talking, I mean, in the spirit of what has been answered, you need to talk to the local partners, you need to talk to the government. The government is still putting priorities on the table. They are engaged on the humanitarian immediate assistance, but they're also engaged in the long-term development goals that they still want to keep very much on the table. I think what gets complicated is in terms of what do you do with all the women and girls and the children who are on the move across different parts of the world. And of course, we have insights from other crises, but I think in Ukraine, what we see is a very strong role for the government and civil society organizations in Ukraine, very strong advocacy on these issues. There's already an openness to learn from experiences elsewhere. For example, in the case of conflict-related sexual violence, they are looking at lessons learned from other parts of the world, including the region. But my message is, look at the situation in your respective countries. They are traveling through this part of the world, and there's a lot that needs to be done, and it's beyond the humanitarian. You really need to look at how you can support them as caregivers, because they're the primary caregivers. So how you can support not just education, but childcare services, because they're also becoming the sole breadwinners in their family. So how you can enable that. So I really, it's this can be a whole topic of conversation by itself, but we are seeing a crisis evolve, and I just wanted to end on one point as well. What we are seeing across the region is, although technology has been seen as an enabler, it can also be a space where there's a lot of violence that is inflicted. Technology is actually enabling trafficking, the use of social media. We've seen a spike of about 600% in searches related to pornography, specifically targeting Ukrainian women and girls. This is very disturbing, and this is happening across the region. So I think there's something that can be done across the board, that we need to look at support, but also how you do not victimize and increase vulnerability. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And yes, Madam President, you have to leave. You have to take your plane back to Sarajevo. Okay. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thank you. We're running out of time, but I want to put just one question to you, Ms. Marianou, and one to you about Mrs. Viras. And it is 4:30. I think that we can have 5 more minutes. So, Ms. Marianou, I read one article of you, I think. Maybe it was an interview, and you talked about territorial inequalities rising. And what does that exactly? No, I'm not asking what's that. I'm asking, after I heard you, I have heard you say that, and then I heard what you told us, and it seems to me that actually there are no territorial inequalities the way you described how you work. That's my question.
Yeah, it's a good question, but there are, unfortunately, territorial inequalities. I mean, one of the European Commission major policies, as you know, is the cohesion policy, which purpose is actually to help bridge these inequalities within the same country, regions within the same country, but also different regions in Europe.
But you work with the regions. Have I understood that correct? So
yes.
You work. So you see that.
Oh yes, yes. You see this on a very regular basis, and I don't know whether you have heard. There is a saying, and there is a study that has been made on the subject, which is called the revenge of the territories that they don't matter, or the territories that they are actually been left behind. And one of the major principles now of the European Union, as you know, is leaving no one behind. Exactly because there are regions left behind. And take it territorial. Take, for instance, the territorial handicaps. Take the islands. They are always having a handicap. They always have, even if they are sources of investments and solar energy or wind energy or whatever, you cannot deliver a couch to some islands. Go in Google. And Google, I want to send my canapé in the island, the Scottish island, I'm not going to say which one. But they don't deliver. I'm really sorry. You see, they don't. That's something. It's an inequality. There's nothing you can do about that. And then you also have economic inequality. So the European Commission's cohesion policy is there to help with that. And we are people that are working very closely with the European Commission, the European institutions, that this policy remains in the future EU budget, so that the ESPA coming to Greece and any other countries will continue to come, because it's not a given at all that in the next programming period this money will go to the cohesion policy to bridge
inequalities. It will go to the energy funding.
There is a lot of little ideas here and there, and as we don't have cash in the town, and the only cash available is that one,
we take from there.
Then we take from there. We give to the Repower EU, we give to the thing, we give to the other, and then it's not a cash pot. It's not a pot of money. It's a policy that has a purpose. And the purpose is to bridge the inequalities that exist. If you read the 8th cohesion report, it says it in a very dramatic way, but it is mentioned there. So we need to do things about continuing this policy, not stopping it for the sake of something else, because we are still in need of that. Is that what you said? Let's not forget we have a problem here we try to sort out, and then we give prioritize.
Not create more problems.
Let's not just give the money to all sorts of little things. We are not fireworkers here, just like fires. It's a policy of investment. You need to keep it. You can't just kill it because it's a pot of money as well. Yeah? Okay.
So,
Sorry.
Yanis, do you have 2-3 minutes more? Okay. You talked about enlargement. Huge issue, many years. Western Balkans are being left out for many, many years. And we saw what happened by Western Balkans being left out. What I mean by that, it's foreign powers, Russia and others, go in the Western Balkans. And so that's something that is very, very bad for the European Union. Do you believe that maybe the European Union must be a little more quick and not so... yeah. And maybe leave some things behind so that the Western Balkans can feel that the European Union is there for them, because you mentioned Turkey, and I am a strong believer that if we had continued to talk with Turkey, then Turkey would have been today a different Turkey, and we wouldn't have so many problems. So maybe the European Union could do something like that this time around?
For me, the answer is not a simple yes. I mean, should the EU be quicker? A yes, but at the same time, I'm not sure whether it can be quicker by, for example, dropping some of the requirements to become a member of the EU, right? Because what you see now is that the countries in the Western Balkans are somewhat less resilient to well, especially malign foreign influence coming from other major powers, and than the EU. And I think that is exactly because in the EU all this the EU legislation is in place, right? So if the countries in the Western Balkans continue with the reforms, and the EU should, of course, fully support that, and maybe it should be more proactive in supporting all of that, then I think these countries will become more resilient against other geopolitical influences, and then when they join the EU as a whole will be resilient. But if you speed up the accession process and countries become a member without the necessary reforms, then you also weaken the geopolitical resilience of the EU at large. So it's not a simple yes. There are some conditions to that.
Thank you very much. Yes, of course.
As one who has been from the very beginning to the end involved in Romania's negotiations for entering into the European Union, I pretend to still, have some knowledge about. I just want to say the following. I fully agree that enlarging means filling specific conditions, criteria by the candidates. But the experience shows that a more forthcoming from the EU side in helping those countries fulfilling the criteria would have been possible. And that's something which I strongly hope that it will happen in the future. And I am saying this looking into the global picture. The EU with the Balkans inside, and I will go further, with Turkey inside, definitely would have much bigger capability to assert itself as a global actor. This is something which I'm longing for. And I think that it is doable. And by the way, we're talking about the atmosphere in the Black Sea. My appreciation for the efforts made by the United Nations and by Turkey, by the way, to reach this grain agreement. I would very much have liked to see that the EU could have played this role, in my opinion, were there a little bit of more, let's say, effort. Thank you.
Well, you kind of answered a question that has been put to us by one of the people that watches us, and it's a question for Mrs. Veres, for you. What can the EU do to play a more important role, to become a global actor, to become like United States of America or China, is the question exactly.
Well, I think when it comes to EU enlargement, we shouldn't forget that the EU is already doing a lot. But for example, when you look at finances and when we talk about cohesion funds, and you see that EU member states have
I think
much bigger budgets
they ask
than
about
the
foreign policy,
candidates.
defense and foreign policy more, and not economics so much.
Okay, so so then the question is, how can the EU assert itself more as a global actor? Okay.
Become more united and become a dynamic international player.
Well, we see quite some problems at this point now with the decision-making capacity of the EU, especially in its foreign policy, right? Every member state has a veto, so the EU's foreign policy is as strong as the weakest point in the whole EU. And I think something should be done. There's a lot of people who call for qualified majority voting. It comes with some risk, but on certain topics in foreign policy, I think that is the way to go, because then you make sure that the EU, at least when crises arrive or when, I don't know, when we talk about sanctions or whatsoever, the EU can act more swiftly, and it will be better able to decide on all these things that we see in the international sphere. So that will be one institutional reform or reform decision-making procedures that could make the EU somewhat stronger on the international
Not to have a veto
sphere.
power anymore,
Yeah.
yes. Okay, thank you very much. Thank
And there
you.
is the conference on the future of Europe that is discussing all these subjects as well. If there is a convention to happen, then these aspects will definitely be discussed.
Yes, but do you know, if you ask Greek people, if you go outside and ask Greek people, no one knows about the conference, which was about people, European people. If you make a poll,
Yeah.
What are the steps to be made for a more united Europe?
I mean, the conference on the future of Europe was, I think, the first try to make sure that citizens are involved in decision making in the EU, and I think it has been a process that was not optimal yet, and there was in some ways some competition between politicians and citizens in that process. So it was a first try. So that also means, of course, that there's room for improvement, and maybe reiterations in the future can be optimized to make sure that the outcomes are. That at the beginning of the process, it's also determined what will happen to the outcomes.
thank you. And now I have one question from Ms. El-Yassir. Considering gender inequalities, is there a need to change people's minds? In which ways formal education can lead to such a change?
Yes, absolutely. I think you definitely need policy level change. It's not something, I don't think we have any situation or any country across the world where changes have been done on gender equality due to popular demand. So I think, changing mindsets, changing the norms definitely starts at a young age. So education as a policy space is a critical one, definitely. So yeah, the short answer to that question is yes.
Okay, thank you all very much. Thank you for being with us for this discussion. Thank you so much. And hope to see you again next year in Athens. We will take a family photo now, and then it's a 3 minutes break, and we are coming back for the next discussion. Thank you.